Hello, everyone. Welcome back. For the ones who doesn't know me yet, I'm Evelyn Fabiano, Strategy and Marketing Director for Baker Hughes, and I want to thank you for joining us today. We're seeing a lot of people logging in, so let me check. People from different countries again, keeping up with us. Thank you very much. So people from the US, people from Brazil again. Bom dia, Brasil. Muito obrigada pela sua participação, minha pátria amada. Buenos dias, México, Colombia. Gracias por su participación. It's an exciting day, and I'm glad to see a lot of people connecting to this great event. We are now joined by Amanda Block and James Hunt, who both lead Baker Hughes' global commercial team for Subsea tiebacks, where we connect the reservoir to topside solutions. Amanda joined us from Houston, and she has strong background in reservoir and production engineering. James is based in London, the UK, and has substantial experience in well construction. Over the last few years, both Amanda and James have brought these experiences to projects which span the breadth of Baker Hughes' portfolio. In this session, we are going to talk about subsea tieback solutions and how to maximize the recovery of subsea assets. So, as we think about projects, quite often we hear the words marginal or sub-economic. What does this really mean? How do operators decide if projects can move forward? And what are the challenges that operators and their partners have to overcome to reach FID? So as you heard from Neil, our Executive Vice President today, we've come a long way with Subsea Connect and building out the foundations from Project Connect to holistic system thinking to flexible partnerships. Over the next 20 minutes, you'll hear from Amanda and James, and they will elaborate further and share some examples on how we've been helping our customers in enabling their projects through this new disruptive approach. After the presentation, we'll open up for questions. I hope you enjoyed this session, and now I'll hand over to James. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn, and hello, everyone. Evelyn just introduced that we're going to explore the words marginal and sub-economic, and what do they mean? What really impacts the economic development point of a project? We can think about cost and break it down into CapEx and OpEx. Collectively, we can call it TOTEX, or total expenditure. But do we ever really know what that's going to be? And what happens if we don't? And how often is it that the final bill is largely different from those initial build-up of quotes that form those early AFEs? Before we go there, let's take a quick look at what a subsea tieback project really involves. And I'd like to encourage all of you to look at the screen. Pick out a word or a few words. What are the most important words you see? Write them down. We're going to come back to them later. But think about what matters. What's the most important piece of the jigsaw? And what bits can we not do without? We've obviously got the non-negotiables: health and safety, our impact to the environment, compliance, quality, security, to name a few. But when we start to look at what other elements make up a project, we get a variety of opinions of what's most important, what's optional, what are the true value drivers. And we do this in separate business units, in groups, verticals or silos, and we create artificial barriers of navigating towards a finished product. Can we rank these topics by levels of importance? Well, I guarantee that if all of us today decided to rank those lists by levels of importance, very rarely would we have two identical lists. The finished product being a successful subsea tieback, connecting a hydrocarbon-bearing reservoir safely and efficiently to infrastructure to take it downstream. But with so many aspects of what make up a project, how do we get everybody to be aligned? How often are we? And what happens if we are? But equally as important to think about, what happens if we're not? Do we all want production at the lowest cost, yielding the best returns? Well, what about if we can improve on our schedule and accelerate the time it takes to bring on that production? What about after we turn on the tap? What about 2 or 3 years down the line? What happens to our production profiles? Are we all interested? Do we all still care? Or actually have the majority of the supply chain left by then, and they've moved on to the next project or the next project? Our experience shows that when we've got such varying organizational layers, all aiming for an end goal, the actual size and shape of the goal isn't always the same. We start to rank what's important. Human nature tells us to. But when you add all of these up and ask the supply chain to do the same and commercialize those assumptions, we begin to see varying work scopes, schedules, and development cost buildups get out of hand. And as you can see on the screen, when you start to plot the key factors that impact the development point of a project against the overall project cost, the returns suddenly don't warrant the investment. The economic thresholds required in order to get that internal CapEx or OpEx spend aren't sanctioned. Projects stall, or worst of all, they don't happen at all. And unfortunately, this is not an uncommon thing. The number of proven but undeveloped projects that exist within this space is not small. The industry needs a change in leadership mindset, a change in procurement strategies, and for all of us to really unlock and understand the word collaboration, we all need to embrace a new way of thinking. And it's this way of thinking that we're going to talk about today. And while it's a fact that, yes, our industry has made significant strides since the downturn to drive down costs and leverage greater and greater value as a consequence, further improvements through traditional models are becoming increasingly difficult to realize. So think of those words that you've written down, and over the next 15 to 20 minutes, question are they still the highest priorities? We'll discuss a few of these issues and share some examples of how we're addressing them. Amanda's now going to explain where we've come along the journey with Project Connect and how this new way of thinking is enabling us to realize so much more value than in traditional ways of working.
Yeah, thanks, James. You know, it's so important to realize that priorities for individual teams may not be aligned. But one of the ways that we've worked to solve that is through our delivery process called Project Connect. We've come a long way since we launched this process, and we're learning every day, but the philosophy remains the same. We have to look beyond standard planning and delivery to align priorities that will ensure what's best for the project. This means looking at total cost of ownership, designing for life of field, and focusing on real and measurable value. Now, traditionally, the approach to project delivery is siloed. Decisions are made independently in separate groups around reservoir and well construction, SPS surf, and topsides, as you see outlined on the slide there. The challenge with this is that it leads to layers of contingency and multiple interfaces and handovers, which all leads to diluted expertise and ultimately uncertainty in cost, schedule, and availability. Integrating workflow through Project Connect methodology breaks down those silos. It really reinvents how projects are planned and executed, where all components of the value chain are going through assess, select, define, develop, and operate together. And because of that, execution certainty becomes embedded in the process, as you have parallel work streams focused on reducing waste. This entire model is centered around partnership with the customer. So there's really a level of trust and openness that's required in order to add the most value. And this can be achieved when we're able to collaborate during the initial stages in the life cycle of a project, which is why that partnership is founded on early engagement. By understanding the required project outcomes earlier, we're able to create simpler, de-risk solutions to meet both technical and economic targets. I'm going to give you some examples later on where we've used this approach and how it ultimately promotes integrated end-to-end solutions. But first, James is going to walk you through the capabilities we have when we talk about a systems approach for Subsea.
Thanks. So we've just talked about an integrated approach, a methodology in Project Connect that brings together all of the elements of a subsea tieback, starting at the reservoir all the way to the topsides. So now let's break down what that looks like. What are the components and building blocks that make up that system? Well, in simple terms, we're starting looking at the subsurface and the reservoir, feeding into the design of the well construction, and then to the subsea architecture made up of wellheads, Christmas trees, controls and manifolds, and then flow lines, whether they're rigid or flexible, and the installation and hookup back to a host, whether it's a platform or an FPSO. So those building blocks. Well, the return on the investment for our operators, start with the sale of the produced hydrocarbons. And getting that bit right is fundamental. So having an understanding of the subsurface and the characteristics and properties of the reservoir is absolutely key. This is where it starts. At Baker Hughes, we've got access to world-leading skill sets in this discipline through Gaffney Klein and Reservoir Technical Services. And whether you're a small to medium independent who may typically outsource this capability, or a large IOC who may typically do this in-house, we've been proving that by aligning on the analysis of the reservoir with you, we can help with optimizing and enhancing drainage and recovery over the life of the field. So where do we go from there? Drilling and completing these wells with an integrated well construction will not only allow us to access the hydrocarbons, but also opens up multiple channels for further optimization. Constructing a lean well doesn't need to be complicated. Can we work together to accelerate drilling and reduce rig days? What about an approach that reduces well lifecycle costs? If we start to look at all the product lines involved together, we can realize so much more value than we would through discrete or single product line approaches. Is this the case of multi-skilling and reducing field crews? Or technologies to enable remote operations? Or what technologies are out there to help us accelerate that time to production? Through a discrete way of working, our oilfield services product company may look at a single product or service, but when we enable a wider angle lens view on the holistic system, we can now tap into a plethora of project enhancing technologies, services, and thinking to further enhance the commerciality of a subsea development. So we've drilled the well, we're at the surface now. We need to consider the subsea layout. How do we take these hydrocarbons back to a host? As you'll hear in the following weeks, and I think next week in more detail, we've got Aptara, a Totex light subsea system. Does the subsea bed need to be complicated, or can we consider a holistic system to make it less so? Aptara brings a modular and structured approach, which is compact, up to 50% lighter, with lower lead times, simpler and easier installation, operation, and maintenance. Again, contributing to a lower total cost of ownership. Then when we look to the topsides and optimization, again, it's about considering the complete system, whether it's debottlenecking, gas handling, or power solutions to extend the life of the asset. If we look at the topsides in isolation, away from the rest of the system, we might miss something. And shortly we'll share an example with you where recently we realized the synergy between the topsides and the downhole well construction. And as we're demonstrating in this event, Baker Hughes are uniquely placed to provide both a deep and wide set of capabilities that cut right across the E&P industry. And clearly, as we work together in the early engagement space, we can work to truly test the potential value that these technologies might leverage. The Project Connect process will deliver this through a systematic and consistent workflow, supported by a team of the highest relevant expertise and competence. Later today, you'll hear more from Barbara and Travis on working together in the early engagement phase, and then from Andrew and Don, who will share some case studies in detail. But now Amanda's going to walk you through a recent example of how this approach has enabled a step change in project economics for some of our customers.
Yeah, thanks, James. I think it's really important to walk through the system like that to show how, we have a major part to play in enabling subsea developments. And I want to expand on that by first understanding the challenge that customers are facing to reach FID. For marginal projects, the challenge is that a traditional contracting strategy doesn't always work. The way most companies are set up, operators and service companies alike, has teams in silos focused on meeting their own KPIs for their function. And when you start to look at the buildup of development costs as shown in the graph, you have the individual components made up of CapEx from the drilling team and the subsea team and facilities and so on. And they will all have assumptions made around contingencies. And that additional cost buildup can tip the project into a sub-economic space. Through our technology and experience, we can align on the assumptions made, adding confidence to reducing the contingencies, in addition to optimizing the development, all with a plan to reduce total expenditure. And we've done this before. In fact, we've been able to improve various financial metrics for customers and have actual realized savings, as you see on the slide. But I want to walk you through an example that we currently have in process, as it's one that's especially challenged in the current environment. This is for a customer here in the Americas, and initially they had no appetite for an integrated process. At the beginning of the year, each of their teams were independently reaching out to various parts of our organization, and there was disconnect and misalignment on what they ranked as most important for the project, just like we saw in the word cloud at the beginning of this presentation. Then came setbacks with the virus and the downturn, and this project, which was already struggling, became sub-economic. So there was really a crucial need to approach the project differently. And so we began with multidisciplinary teams working on things like well design and tieback optimization and umbilical optimization. And so we analyzed the complete system. And there were simplifications that could be made to take cost out, but we found one of the bigger impacts came from artificial lift selection and design. In this case, the product cost alone for lifting method could not be looked at in isolation, as there was a significant impact to production and OpEx for future workovers that would considerably affect the economics. So there were multiple options to review, but we had to look at what was best for the project technically and economically. So we verified the right application by integrating lifting method and flow assurance with the topsides. It was really imperative that we considered implications for life of field. And through this process, we started answering questions that, may not have been addressed before or would have been addressed too late. On a similar note, another example where this approach really enabled conversations that would never happen is when we had a joint workshop with a customer in the North Sea. And this was for a gas well tied back to existing infrastructure. The gas well would need to be hydraulically stimulated, and the platform processing equipment would need modification to be able to handle that. We had all the disciplines together reviewing assumptions for the project, and the topsides team had assumed that they would need to factor in an additional month during scheduled turnaround for installation of a proppant filter. Our completions team challenged that and brought up that we have a downhole technology called deep frac that eliminates the need for proppant fluid on topsides. And by using this technology instead of the standard method, there was a significant impact to the project. This meant that first gas could be accelerated, it prevented deferred production and revenue, and in addition to saving the cost to do the topside modification, it reduced HSE risk. Without these integrated workshops, synergy between completions and topsides would not have been uncovered. And so, in summary here, this approach is key, especially when you have marginal projects, as return on investment relies on total expenditure coming down, and that can often be achieved through our access to technology. So those are just a couple examples of many where this approach has been beneficial to moving subsea projects forward. Just before we close, we're going to wrap this up by summarizing the value that Subsea Connect can bring to you.
Thank you, Amanda. So as we summarize, we're going to reiterate the common theme that we've been talking about that's been persistent through this session is taking that holistic approach, providing a reservoir to topside solution. This allows us to work with you, our customers, in order to unlock more value through looking at the project as a whole, understanding the economics across the development and accelerating delivery of production in the process. So the value we can bring with this approach is based around three fundamental enablers. You see them on the screen: accelerating production, maximizing recovery, and reducing toe tax and carbon. These enablers play a key role in influencing and impacting the economics of a project and improving the viability. And as I delve a little deeper into these now, I'd like to reiterate, we're not simply talking about offering products or services. Taking a holistic view means we're proposing a project solution and venturing away from the conventional procurement methods that we're used to. So first up, accelerating production. The date of first oil or first gas is a defining moment in any development, and it's the point where our customers begin to realize revenues. So our holistic system approach gives us the capability to challenge the status quo. What do I mean by that? We're able to challenge the existing timeline or the base case timeline to first oil or first gas with the shared view and shared goal of bringing it forward, helping our customers realize the revenues sooner. Not only does this capability have the capability to reduce costs, but again, bring forward that revenue stream and improve on those cash metrics. So on to lowering TOTEX and carbon. This enabler really addresses the key issue on the project economics and allows us to identify solutions which enable our customers to improve profitability through reducing cost, driving down the TOTEX, and improving those financial metrics that Amanda spoke about, cash flow, NPV, and IRR. And the fact that we're focusing on a reservoir to topside solution gives us the ability to use our synergies to the benefit of our customers. And in addition, just like the rest of the industry, we are committed to reduction in carbon footprint. This holistic approach gives us the opportunity to optimize carbon reduction in the supply chain during early engagement, planning, execution, and all through over the life of the asset. So finally, on to maximizing recovery. Our field evaluation capabilities, combined with our advanced technologies and digital offerings, means that we are well positioned to help our customers in optimizing of their field production. Prolonging the life of the field is so important, and we understand the direct links to the revenue. As a result, we place huge emphasis on using this holistic approach to give our customers cost and technical certainty, production assurance, and increasing the life of field in the process. Now, with the way the industry is evolving and adapting, it is so important that we carry on innovating and developing solutions that give our customers that cost certainty and assurance while reducing cost in the process. So Subsea Connect really is starting at the assessment with early engagement and continuing through to execution and operation. Now, earlier on, we asked you to write down a word. What's the most important thing you think of when considering a subsea tieback? So keep thinking about those words. For some of you, they may have already changed. But ask your colleagues and peers, ask the teams you work with, and ask the supply chain. Ask everybody, what does success look like? And are we all aligned in what value really means? So with that, we'd like to thank you for your time. I believe we've had quite a few questions come in. So Evelyn, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Amanda. This was a very insightful session. So I'm looking here, we got a lot of questions from our audience, and let me just start here. First, I want to thank our audience for contributing with those questions during the presentation, because I had a number of questions around the Baker Hughes approach and how it's different, so I've grouped them together. So hang with me a little bit. So James, I will first directly this one to you. How does this approach differ to traditional ways with a view of contracting and procurement?
Okay, thank you, Evelyn. So this is different. I'll start by saying that this approach is not a one-size-fits-all. I think I'll start with a little quote. A major operator from supply chain told us recently, I think it's relevant here, we want economically viable production. The cost of a single piece of equipment becomes irrelevant if it's for the greater good of the project. You know, we discussed value drivers, and understanding what is important to a project is really about understanding what are those value drivers, and then collectively, what can we do, Baker Hughes and the operator and the wider supply chain, what are those levers that we can pull on to realize the value drivers? I think this is where it gets different. You know, in a traditional model, predefined work scopes may be put out to tender and evaluated. Those work scopes may be set up through discrete groups and maybe not fully integrated. But what we're doing here enables integration and enables us to break down those artificial barriers. You know, again, this is about doing what's right for the project and challenging ourselves when we say, well, how does my product, how does my service have an impact on the project? I think you mentioned part of the question there on contracting. So we know that forming contracts is not an overnight thing. It can be quite a labor-intensive, heavy front-end loaded task. We're not necessarily reinventing the wheel here. Let's not reinvent the wheel. If we've got existing contracts in place, let's use them. Let's leverage what we've got, but let's make some amendments if we can. How do we make them better suited to further enhance the commerciality as we go along? And I think that's a key difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to thank you for that. And And you're absolutely right. I've managed so many contracts, and I remember when you're negotiating those contracts, it's 1 to 3 months to get them to the finish line. It's all time that you're wasting just being able to put the project forward. So it's a really good insight. So Amanda, I'd like you to follow up on that topic. What are the practicalities of this approach, and can you expand more on the benefits?
Yeah, I can expand on that. I think James said it earlier, this is really all just about doing what's best for the project. I gave an example earlier today where we're working with this customer in the Americas, and they now see value in integration. And that's because the practical benefit that we brought to them was that we could change their project economics. We could make a difference there. And we did that through challenging assumptions. We got our multidiscipline teams together to look at technology and schedule and ways to maximize recovery. So that really made an impact. In addition, I spoke about contingencies earlier as well, and some operators like to refer to unallocated provision or UAP, which is just a sum of the known unknowns. The point is, these factors are all, typically a lot higher at the beginning of a project. So there's a practical benefit here around early engagement. So the earlier we can get into a project, the earlier we can understand why those contingency factors and UAP factors are so high, and figure out what we can do about it.
Thank you. And I totally get it that a supplier challenging project assumptions is a new arena. It can be challenging too. However, I think the way that we are doing, the way that we are approaching in collaboration, just what Neo said in the earlier session, it's collaborating with our customer, it's getting earlier and having the dialogue, the discussion. It's a great approach, and I think it's a good thing. So Amanda, I'll take advantage that you were up already. So I got an interesting question related to energy transition and how Subsea tiebacks approach align with carbon reduction. Could you help us with that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's a relevant topic. I think Neil touched on this earlier in the session right before this one. But I'll start with Baker Hughes' commitment that we announced last year, and that was to reduce our operating emissions by 50% by 2030, and then to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And I'd say from a technology perspective, we've made some significant strides to drive down the carbon footprint for ourselves and for our customers. In fact, all of our product companies are looking to develop low to zero emission solutions. And the Aptara modular subsea system is a great example of that. Next week, I think John Kerr and Simon Corrigan are going to go through details on Aptara. So that would be a good session to join on that. But, I'd also say if we look at some of the indirect ways that we're able to align around carbon reduction, it's important to highlight our energy transition team, the digital solutions business, and Gaffney Klein, who are all working together to help customers understand their carbon footprint. So they're coming up with ways to measure and monitor carbon footprint, as well as develop strategic plans to improve it.
That's awesome. So James, I want to go back to you a little bit, and looking back on Baker Hughes' approach, how does this work when the operator has a stock equipment on the shelves from another OEM?
Yeah, okay, thanks. So it's really relevant, and this has come up before. I'll repeat a few things that I've been saying. It's about doing what is right for the project. If we could have the whole supply chain aligned and measured by the same success, that is the goal, that is key. Earlier in the presentation, I started talking about value drivers and about ranking what's important. I think what I'll add here is we know that assurance on schedule is always near the top of that list, if not the top. And so if we can eliminate interfaces and reduce the number of supply chain parties, then we can have more assurance on that schedule. If you look at how that impacts on the project economics, it's key that for every month that production is delayed, NPV is eroded. For every month that production is accelerated, NPV goes up. So assurance on that production is absolutely key, and we need to have that. I'll share with you, we were faced with this exact question at the end of 2019, where an operator did have existing equipment from another supplier. We didn't immediately rule it out. Again, we considered it. How did that fit into the jigsaw? And we took it seriously. We had to. We kept the mantra of do what's right for the project. So we all looked at it as a team. And whereas, yes, on a discrete basis, it would appear that that piece of equipment was cheaper standalone, when we consider the whole system, it wouldn't allow for assurance of production. So again, looking at the whole picture, in this instance, the operator decided not to use that piece of equipment and for Baker Hughes to take the entire scope. I'll repeat again, it's about doing what's right for the project. So there's just one example.
Yeah, I appreciate it. For sure, it's a good mindset. We had a few questions around project economics. Can you expand on how this approach impacts NPV? Amanda, I will direct this to you, please.
Yeah, happy to answer that one. You know, I gave an example earlier about deep frac, right? So that technology enabled a wider project impact. So really, to get a significant impact to NPV, it comes down to taking an integrated techno-commercial approach like that. So, you know, we do this by plugging our key technologies into our economic model. And this allows us to really see the direct effect of the implementation of that technology on the whole system. And, you know, I'd add to that it really makes it easy to compare different options because we can really see, you know, right away how that affects the rest of the system and how it, you know, having multiple variables like that can be addressed.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. So James, I got one for you. Switching gears to digital, what role does digital play in the Baker Hughes system offering?
Okay, so we could spend a long time on this. So it goes without saying, digital is absolutely integral. It's not a bolt-on, it's not an afterthought, it's inherent throughout the whole system. You heard me talk about the building blocks and the components that when we talk about a subsea tieback, from the reservoir to the well construction all the way to the topside. So maybe I could give a little bit of an example on each of those building blocks. You know, when we look at the reservoir and the subsurface and what we do with that, and how digital can help us through the well construction, you start looking at things like beacon, remote operations. This is not just enabling us to see into the reservoir as we drill through, it allows us to control what we do. So remote operations is huge in the well construction phase, and our oilfield services product company have got some really cool technology where they're utilizing digital. You know, we've recently launched Lucida in drilling services to enable automated trajectory drilling. These are just a couple of examples. If I quickly go on to the subsea piece, the subsea architecture through oilfield equipment, I could talk to things like Engage Subsea, remote inspections, real track, where we can leverage digital to allow us to monitor the progress of production manufacturing processes remotely. You know, remotely doing things, I think, is probably more relevant to us right now, especially in these challenging times we're in. We're all experiencing remote working in some way. If we switch gears a little bit to look at things like asset performance management and the world of digital transformation, this is something that we are completely attacking head on We've got the joint venture with C3AI, and this is really exciting, where we are combining the power of the domain expertise with leading AI technologies. I could go on for a while about this, but what I will say is in 2 weeks, I believe, you'll hear more from Alex and Asal, where they will have a focus session on explaining really where digital is enabling us in things like carbon reduction and improved productivity. So really relevant.
Yeah, that's correct, and I'll be there too. So Amanda, I'm going to direct this one to you. Another question that popped up here. What's Baker Hughes doing to affect production assurance?
Okay. Yeah, production assurance is a really broad term, but it's really an integration activity linking the reservoir to the host and everything in between, right? So, one example that comes to mind for me is around production chemistry and flow assurance, and challenges around hydrates and paraffin. So, we have a full suite of chemical solutions to, predict and mitigate those challenges. But I think you can also look at equipment reliability. And so, we have technology as well that uses artificial intelligence to predict events for life of field. So that's pretty important. But I'd say there's a session coming up in 2 weeks with Paul Stead and Christina Sanders, and they're going to talk about flow assurance and production assurance and how all of that affects life of field economics.
Great, thank you. James, we have a question around commercial models. Can you expand on how flexible we can be and give a little bit of more examples around that?
Yes. So first of all, for those that listened to Neil and Paul earlier, Neil mentioned how a commercial model can drive a solution. There is not a single commercial model that works for every project. I'll start with that, because every project is different. They all have their own nuances and differences, and they all have their different what is value for the project. So this is about us being able to adapt and have a commercial model which will address those value drivers. So it's important for us to work closely with the operator, with the rig contractor, with other partners, and doing what is right for the project to drive value over and above what we would do in traditional ways. Traditional commercial models aren't necessarily integrated. So this is what we're doing now. We're driving a lot more towards an integrated approach, where a commercial model will have value creation through incentives, whether they are linked to numbers of interfaces or focusing on a total cost of ownership. So I don't think any two of our commercial models are the same, but what we are introducing a lot more is performance-based contracts, where we've got compensation linked to a variety of KPIs, from what could I say, performance operation targets, even down to behavioral KPIs. The way that we work with customers and with other partners, a lot of it is down to our behaviors and bringing a trust-based mindset. And so we measure ourselves on that. We hold ourselves accountable, and sometimes we're remunerated depending on how we show up. So this is really different. It's important that we have something that benefits all parties. This is not a one-sided thing. That kind of goes against the word integration. Again, it's about how do we extract more and more value through an integrated approach, and really it goes down to those value drivers and working together to form the appropriate commercial model.
Yeah, excellent. And it really shows that Baker Hughes is putting skin in the game, right? Which I think the operators are looking for that. So I think it's really good. Thank you. So we've got time for this one last question. So the reservoir was mentioned a lot in the systems overview. Considering that a lot of operators have strong capabilities on reservoir knowledge, how does this approach work? Amanda, I would like to direct this question to you.
Yeah, great question. I think we all understand that the reservoir is the heart of any subsea tieback development. So, we're not looking to replace any in-house reservoir capability. We understand there's an expertise held here by a lot of our customers. However, there are multiple ways in which we can enhance it. James spoke earlier about RTS, or our Reservoir Technical Services team, and they are extremely experienced across the globe with many different operators and in different basins. So there's really a potential here for utilizing that experience to peer review and really enable what's best for the field. Another path actually is through technology. So one of the main advantages that we have with our RTS engineers is that they're very familiar with our completions equipment. They're familiar with our well construction capabilities. And all of this is important because, number of wells and location can impact things like boosting needs and subsea system selection and topside requirements, which is really why we choose to look at everything as a whole system whenever we optimize a development.
Thank you very much. That's a really, really good closing for this session. So that's been great. I love their interaction with our audience. I want to thank our panelists, both Amanda and James, for this great session. I know we gave you a lot of information, but for the Americas, so Amanda leads our commercial team for the Subsea tieback. So if you have any questions, just write down her name, Amanda Block, and you can contact her after this session or next week. So we've got all your questions and we'll follow up with each one of you. And again, after this session, remember that if you revisit the Subsea Connect channel, you'll find our digital solutions fair where you can take a dive into Subsea and explore the infrastructure from seabed to topsides. It's a really cool platform. Thank you for joining us today. I hope to see you in the next session where Barbara and Travis will talk about Baker Hughes Subsea Connect methodology to systems engineering that links world-class technology and services portfolio together, enabling challenging energy projects to succeed safely, economically, and efficiently. Thank you, and I see you soon. Goodbye.